let's talk about our next project, the finger joint box. So called because the main joint for making the box itself are finger joints going all the way around. We also will have a lid with a rabbet and then decorative molding cut on the top, and we have a bunch of different types of handles in the back that you can choose from. And then for the base, we have another bottom that you'll cut another rabbet on, and then shoe molding to miter and then cut decoratively on the router table, which we will be introducing as part of this project, the new power tool, the router table. So the first step is to choose the sides that I've resawn on the bandsaw, so they are extra thin and they'll make good sides, especially when you finger joint them and then glue them to the base. They will become rigid and an effective box for trinkets, or if you have a little brother who is still in the age of collecting, you can put various things in it. And the first step is to select your sides. We've got 2 short sides and 2 long sides to select. And because they're resawn, they're going to need to be sanded down because the insides are kind of rough. So I've selected here for my demo some sides that most people would not be interested in because they have knots. So all of the sides are paired since it's sliced straight down the middle. Each pair make books. So you take this guy and then you open it up and you get what essentially are the covers of a book, and then they're going to go on opposite sides of your box. So when you open them up to the inside, they're rough and they're going to need to be sanded down. Now if you select incorrectly, then you're going to get guys that are not books, and you should put them back where you got them so that you can get sides that are books. So we're going to start out with 2 shorts, 2 longs, a pair of shorts and a pair of longs, and then we're going to sand them down lightly. Now when you sand them, you need to be very careful not to rock your orbital sander over the edge and narrow these corners or even this edge, because this edge needs to be part of the joint. And if you narrow it down, then it can't be part of the joint. So the sanding needs to go with the grain and stay flat all the way there and back so that you get a smooth finish, which if you're going to be careful and do a good job with this, you want to show off the wood grain. That's the whole point. Don't cover it up with paint. But if you mess up the sanding, then maybe you end up painting it. So let's sand this down, and then we'll start working on the layout. We have sanded these down and gotten rid of the saw marks from the inside. We can lay them out, and there are a couple of different ways to set this up. But the most important thing is to understand that these sides are going to be joined to each other, and so they need to be matched up appropriately. So this end needs to match up with this end, and so on around our box. So these 2 guys really care about each other, and they don't care about those guys. So what we're going to be doing is matching this guy up with this guy, and we need to be consistent with our matching up, also with the fact that one side is going to be the bottom and the other side is going to be the top. So we need to mark off a couple of things here, and then we're going to very lightly mark them off so that we can sand them off at the very end when we're all done. That was just some preliminary sanding. So I want to mark the bottom and the inside faces that I'm going to have. So everything that's up right now is going to be an inside face, and everything that's towards the inside of the rectangle is going to be at the bottom. So I'm going to mark that with a very light line. Now because I have knots here, that will help me keep straight, but most of our boxes don't have such prominent knots to help with that. Now that I have my bottom inside face lines marked, I need to mark off the joints. So what I need to keep in mind is I'm not marking this piece of wood as A. What I'm marking is this side is going to be joined to this side, so this is going to be joint A, and this is going to be the other side of joint A. And I want to mark them not too close to the edge, because I'm going to be marking along here all my joints. I'm going to do the same thing going around here. B, B. This is joint C. This is the other half of joint C, D, and D. Now that I have all of my joints labeled, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, I need to mark the depth that I'm going to need for each of the joints. Now this is the finger joint process that we practiced before as part of just the joint making process. So we're going to set aside those guys. I'm going to pick A and go with A, and I need to know how deep to cut in this short guy, and well, that's going to be based on how thick the long guy is. So I'm going to take my long guy, set him up, and get him to be flush all the way across the back, hold him down, and strike the line. There we go. Now I don't want to cut any deeper on this guy because that's going to be more deep than what I need for that guy. And I'm going to reverse these guys and do the same thing with these guys here. So the short guy, I'm going to put flush and then strike a line. Ooh, was that flush? I think it shifted. That's annoying. I hate when it shifts after I flush it. All right, nope, that was okay. All right, now these are the insides. Now I need to flip them over, flip them both over, and do it all over again on the outside. Because the outside is what's actually going to be seen. Short on long, and then I do the same thing with long on short. And if you'll notice, I flip them both over so that I can be consistent in how I'm drawing the lines. Especially because most of this wood is a little bit warped. Welcome to pine in this wood shop where humidity changes pretty much daily. All right, there. Set them back in the original position, and I bring these guys back. Now I have this guy and this guy measured relative to each other, and if you can look closely, you notice that this is a little bit deeper here than it is there, and that's because this piece of wood is not exactly rectangular. Now that I've done that with the A's, I need to go and do it with the B's, C's, and D's. So let's do that. All right, now that I've drawn all the shoulder lines that are the relative thickness between each board, and it's each end of each board, it's not the middle, because it's this end that's going to be joined to that end. And I've done both the insides and the outsides. So 4 lines per board, that's 16 lines. Now it's time to start laying out the actual finger joints on each pair. So pair by pair, we're going to take, I'm going to start with A again. So we're going to take our A and match them up with the same, and our 2 bottom of the box lines so that they are on the inside. And then we're going to treat this like a book and sandwich these guys together, and then get our square and put it in the bench vise and start setting up our lines. So let's get a close-up of that. All right, getting the finger joint layout. we're going to want the insides, the bottoms and the insides that we've marked, and the joint with the same letter together, and we're going to close it like it's a book, and every single time you should always have a short and a long. And what we want is the edges to line up and the ends to line up. And we're going to clamp them together in the bench vise with most of it sticking out. So it's okay if there's a little gap, but if they shift at all, you want to get them unshifted so that both edges are, there we go, both edges are lined up with each other. Now if you do this and one of them is wider than the other one, bring it over to me and I'll cut them down to be exactly the same width on the table saw, because they need to be the same width. These are the sides of the box, so those widths that right now are going to end up being the heights. Now you're going to take your square, and if you have a combo square, set it so that it's clamped on an inch mark. If you've got a speed square, you don't have to do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to mark off every ½ inch going across the width of these boards. So put the lip firmly up against the one edge, and every ½ inch. So a ½ inch over, and put a dot. And this is easiest if you have a sharpened pencil. And then another ½ inch, which will be on the inch mark. Then another ½ inch off the inch mark. And mark these guys firmly. Now only be firm when you are confident of the ½ inch marking. And this last one is going to be a little short because I cut these a little less than 4 inches wide. Now that I have each guy marked off, I'm going to turn my square so that the lip is along the face. The ruler goes across the thickness, and I'm going to put my pencil in, slide over, and strike a line. Put the pencil in, slide over, strike a line. And what this does is make sure that my fingers are perfectly aligned across the joint. Now when you get to a certain distance, it's time to switch, but always make sure that you keep the lip on the same face. Pencil in. Now if you're ambidextrous, this is easier. If you're not ambidextrous, this gets a little bit difficult when you're doing this with your left hand. Now that I have all of my lines marked, I need to make sure I know which ones are going to be the fingers to keep and which one is the waist to be removed. So I'm going to call this guy waist to be removed. Now I need to remove the next guy diagonally. So this is the finger to keep, this is waist. So this finger is going to go into the space vacated by this guy, but then this is a finger to go into the space vacated by that guy. All the way down the line, we're going to zigzag our X's, so that the X's make a zigzag and the not X's also make a zigzag. With these guys marked off on the edge, now we need to mark off straight down with our square onto the faces. And if you have your square set a little bit too long, you can shorten it up now, and 3 inches ought to do it for me. At this point, the specific length doesn't matter. What matters is the straight edge, and we want this line to be a continuation onto the face. So you're going to bring it up, and if you have to try a couple of times to get the line to line up exactly, that's okay because the pencil has thickness there. So this X here is going to also be transferred onto that face because we're going to remove this whole thing. And then we're going to do the same thing down the line. I'm going to do this on both pieces of wood. On this side, and then we're going to do it on the other side also. And we're also going to be transferring the X's onto the face, because when you're cutting this, you're probably actually looking at the face, not looking at the end. Now, that puts this on this side, but it hasn't been done yet on this side. Now, if you're doing this with a coping saw, you definitely need to have it on both sides, and it would probably be safe if you did that on both sides also with the scroll saw, even if you're going to use a scroll saw. So I will do this on both sides. That one wasn't square. That's over. Now, once I've done the tops, insides, and the outsides of the A joint, it's time to do that for the B joint, the C joint, and the D joint. The more care you take with this layout here, the better your final product has a chance of being. The order that you do it in doesn't matter, but what does matter is that you make sure that you're doing the two Ds and you have the lines matched up so that when you put them together, these lines, so this line and this line, are touching on this same side here, and then the edges, and you're measuring carefully at 1/2 inch. So let's finish these up. Once you have done all of the layout lines for the finger joints, you need to reset up your box pieces with the lines on the inside like you had them before, and the A next to the A and the B next to the B and so forth, and check each one to make sure that it is properly laid out. So you take the A's and you put them end to end and make sure that the X's still zigzag. And then look at the ends, make sure the X is still zigzag. And then look at the outsides and make sure that the X is still zigzag. Double check everything so that you don't end up with a situation where you have flipped something upside down and then you cut off two fingers that are right next to each other by mistake. So going around and spending this time, there we go. Spending this time on double checking your layout to make sure that the lines match up and the X is zigzag is very important to save on unnecessary pain and suffering. Layout is important. This is essentially the Bible for this, because this is what you're going to go by. All right, all of my lines match up. So now I can start cutting these guys. And I'm going to use the scroll saw for this, but you could also use the coping saw if you would prefer, if you're more comfortable with that, or some combination of coping saw and chisel. However, my recommendation is to do it with the scroll saw and to take your time with the scroll saw.